In the previous lesson, we looked at the first two buckets of work in our filtering system. Now we'll cover the last bucket. The last bucket of work is the work your team won't do, at least in the near term. There are two main characteristics of don't do's. They don't drive a North Star outcome, and they don't drive strong ROI. Any work that primarily drives an outcome that is not a North Star should be deprioritized. This ensures your team stays focused on the OKRs and North Stars that have been prioritized. For example, imagine you're a marketing leader at FanDuel. The marketing org decides during annual planning that they will prioritize number of new users as their North Star for the upcoming year. However, an executive reaches out to you to say she's noticed that the average revenue per active user has flattened out. They want you to drive up that metric, possibly by implementing an email marketing campaign around entering more contests. Because this work is not focused on driving the agreed-upon North Star, it should be bucketed as don't do. We'll address how you can communicate this decision back to the exec later in this lesson. Now let's talk about initiatives that don't drive strong ROI. Specifically, we're talking about work that has a lower impact than both the work your team is currently focused on and the other new initiatives that they're exploring. Let's say you're leading the marketing org at Twitch, and your target audience is men under 35. Someone excitedly says to you, "This new podcast is really blowing up. We should think about doing a segment with them." However, you know that this podcast caters primarily to men in their 40s and 50s, not your target audience. To top it off, actually pursuing this would require deprioritizing another important initiative in order to collaborate with the podcast, select the guest speaker, and write the script. Because this initiative isn't aligned with your target audience, it's likely that the impact on your marketing OKRs would be low. So it's best to put this in your don't do bucket. Part of being a good marketing leader is protecting your team's time so that they can focus on what matters most. We want to maintain strong yet healthy relationships with cross-functional stakeholders. Saying no can be tough. It feels like we're leaving stakeholders frustrated or creating tension that will result in less collaboration in the future, putting those relationships at risk altogether. But saying yes to everything puts your team at risk of overload. Here's the thing. Saying no and maintaining strong relationships with partners don't have to be mutually exclusive. There is a way to have your cake and eat it too. The key is to get alignment on priorities and trade-offs during annual planning, not after the fact. It's important to identify the outcomes you want to drive, but it's just as important to lay out the outcomes you won't be focused on and gain buy-in from execs and cross-functional partners. Setting those boundaries up front will make it easier to protect the team's time to focus on what matters most. Fast forward to the day when you need to call back to those annual planning decisions because you need to share a bucketing decision with a partner or executive. We recommend using the CARE framework to structure your response. Contextualize the request by reminding the stakeholder of the outcomes your org is responsible for driving and the work that's already on their plate. Share any additional information you have that might mitigate their concerns. Anchor the conversation in your decision and rationale. Don't beat around the bush. Be clear and direct about your decision and explain why you can't take on the work in its current form. For example, you don't have the capacity, or there is other work that takes priority. Being unclear only delays the inevitable, or makes the stakeholder feel like they can push back on your response. Recommend an alternative if one exists. Being solution-oriented in moments like this will help you build a relationship that's collaborative, not transactional. Maybe you can offer up some capacity to support the request if it's scoped down, or do it at a later date. If no capacity is available, think about other low-cost ways you can support the work. Maybe it's a coaching meeting, or sharing resources async to equip someone on their team to do the work. And finally, empathize. Recognize why the request matters to this stakeholder and vocalize their perspective. You might say, "I know this isn't the answer you wanted, but I'd love to find a workaround that still enables you to get what you need to achieve your outcomes." Let's return to our don't do FanDuel example. An exec wants you to start an email marketing campaign to drive up the average revenue per active user, ARPU for short. But you need to say no because this work is not focused on prioritizing the North Star you agreed upon, which, you'll remember, was increasing the number of new users. Here's how you might structure your response to that exec. First, contextualize. You can say, "The leadership team decided that marketing would prioritize new user growth this quarter. Our team is heads down focused on driving this outcome through testing new channels, improving the conversion funnel, and launching a new user onboarding experience. The flattening out in ARPU is a valid flag, but we're not too concerned about it at the moment. We're still hitting our financial targets, and we had a spike last month because of a big promotion, so the flattening out we're seeing now is a relative decline coming off of that promotion." Next, anchor. Here you might say something like, "Given the work we currently have on our plate and my assessment of the revenue data, I think the team's capacity is better spent on the new user growth initiatives we have going on." Then recommend. That being said, we'll continue to keep an eye on ARPU, and if we see this pattern continue in the coming months, we'll divert resources there. And finally, empathize. I hear your concern and want you to know this isn't something we're going to neglect. Thank you for flagging this to us. You can rely on this framework as a starting point when crafting responses to cross-functional partners and stakeholders. But as you build credibility with these stakeholders over time, you may find that you don't need to take all of these steps to communicate your decision while maintaining the relationship. Kieran says, "Your broader goal is to build trust with your partners and stakeholders. Once you've done that, you'll be able to say no faster because they trust you and the why behind your decision." In the next lesson, we'll continue talking about triaging reactive work, specifically when it's deemed urgent.